Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Analysing Anfield, your tactics and analytics podcast, courtesy of the Blood Red channel. I'm Josh Williams and I'm joined for the first time in 2023 by Mo Stewart. Mo, how was your new year, mate?
It's been good. It's been good. I was doing my other job on New Year's Eve, DJing, bringing in the new year, which is always fun to do. But yeah, it's been. I was thinking it's been a while since we've done one of these. Like I've done another show. I've had a very entertaining and educational chat with Mr. Carragher on Twitter, and I've watched Liverpool play 2 really bad games of football. So lots has been going on.
Yeah, it has been a while. I'm not sure when our last episode was. I think it was before the return to Premier League football, and obviously Liverpool have played 3 times now since that, and bought a new player, which we didn't see coming. So we've got quite a lot to get through, really. Obviously, we're not going to touch on each game individually, but we can talk about all 3 as a whole, really. Maybe that's an interesting way into it. It makes us a little bit different compared to other podcasts. We can look at 3 as a group there and determine what our findings are from those games. And we've also got a few talking points surrounding just a bit of news on Pep Lijnders and narratives surrounding that sort of thing, should we say. Well, yeah, I think we'll start with the obvious, and that is Cody Gakpo. Obviously, he signed for Liverpool. I mean, I did not see it coming. I don't know about you, Mo.
No, I mean, I thought that he was going to end up going to Manchester United. That's what it all looked like. I know they were kind of, pussyfooting around to a certain extent, but that's just what Man United do. I expected them to get it done. It all looks like it was going there, but apparently we had a long interest in him as well. And I think the main surprise wasn't so much the fact that there'd been no kind of rumors or anything, because Liverpool have done that before. I think the surprise was that they'd gone for a forward when everyone was expecting a midfielder coming in, but also they'd been decisive around in injury, which is something that in the past they haven't done. This time there was no waiting around to January 31st. This time it was no, we need to cover that, and they did. So from that perspective, I'm happy, and I think he's an exciting prospect for sure.
Yeah, well, we are going to cover him. We are going to provide the standard Analysing Anfield background as to what this player is about, what he's like, where he shines in the numbers and all that sort of stuff. But I am similar to you in the sense that I thought he was going to go to Manchester United. And if you'd have said to me, before Christmas, really, Liverpool will make a £40 million-ish signing in the days leading up to the opening of the transfer window, I would have been pretty surprised if it wasn't a midfielder. But at the same time, I can see the logic behind it. I do think we probably needed a bit of a boost for the rest of the season, considering, we were playing in Oxlade. Well, we have played Oxlade-Chamberlain 3 matches in a row on the left of the front 3. And it's just not the same for me. He's nowhere near as threatening as you need to be to occupy one of those roles. Diaz is going to be out for about 3 months, I think. And Jota has missed most of the season, so he's planned to come back at the end of this month-ish. But whether it actually happens remains to be seen. So Liverpool need goals at the end of the day, and that's one of the departments, one of the boxes that Cody Gakpo ticks, is just simple ability to score. His record this season so far is very good. He's so far got 9 goals in the Dutch Eredivisie and 12 assists. Which is a solid return, Mo.
It is a solid return, and from speaking to people who cover the Dutch league quite a lot more often than I do, he has taken a jump in the last 12 to 18 months where his actual output has increased dramatically. He's always had the threat. He's always been a really good acceleration, good balance in his dribbling ability, and he's always had a really good ability to deliver a ball. But that output has increased recently, and for me, that seems to be indicative of a player who understands his game a little bit more, understands the team around him, making better decisions, which is something that I always like to see in a player. And particularly when you're coming into a new system, that's something that he's going to need to have in his locker to be able to pick up what we want to do.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you touch on his upturn there, actually, because I sent a newsletter out yesterday on Gakpo, it was kind of the first time I've really talked about him. I haven't really tweeted much about him or anything like that. But one of the things that struck me is it's the third signing in a row that Liverpool have made third major signing in a row that Liverpool have made, where we seem to have really jumped on a player just as he's making what I like to call the leap. As in stepping up from one level to another, just quite obviously. And we signed Luis Diaz last winter. And he, in the months leading up to that, was very obviously making the leap. He'd scored 14 goals in 18 appearances in the Portuguese top flight, compared to the previous year in which he made 30 appearances and scored 6 times. So that's a real jump in what he was doing. Then in the summer, we go for Darwin Núñez, who scored 26 times in the Portuguese top flight, compared to his total the season before of 6. So again, massive jump. Liverpool jump on it. Liverpool try and catch the wave. And again, this seems very similar. Last season, Gakpo posted 12 assists and 12 goals in the Dutch Eredivisie. This season, he's already matched his number of assists, and he's 3 short of his goals in about 13 fewer appearances. So and obviously we saw him in the World Cup, and it was a bit of a coming of age, I thought, in the World Cup. So it's a bit of a theme at the minute where Liverpool really keeping a finger on the pulse, basically. And any of these players who start to showcase real signs of making a step, Liverpool seems to be moving really quickly on them. And I think it's a decent tactic, to be honest. There's a bit of risk attached to it, of course, considering some of these players don't have a lot of evidence behind them, especially Núñez and Diaz. But I think it's proactive. It's a proactive approach in the market.
It is, and I think it's a way of closing the gap with people who have got deeper pockets and potentially more attractive propositions when you consider the likes of Real Madrid, because it's all a balance, isn't it? It's finding that sweet spot between almost someone you can never really guarantee someone's going to be good, but like you say, once they've made a leap and their output is improving, you can almost kind of predict, okay, well, if they can reach that level, if we get them into our system now, we can help them maintain and then improve that level. But if you wait too long, then the price is going to go up and up and up. I mean, a classic example of this is Enzo Fernandez, because at the moment, there's lots of people saying, well, Liverpool should have bought Enzo Fernandez in the summer when he cost 15 million rather than now when he's costing 106 million. Well, the problem with doing that is that as we stand here, he's only played 80 games. Club and country, if you include Benfica in Argentina. Obviously, he played some time for River Plate before that. That in terms of the sample size for making real data analysis and real analysis on a player who's going to cost that much, it's a very small sample size. So you've got to weigh the balance of, are we going to try and get in early, get a cheaper guy, but then there's less of a guarantee? Or are we going to wait till we're more sure that this guy's going to be the guy, but then have to pay a lot more?
Yeah, you're spot on. And I think, I've expressed pretty strong thoughts on that over the years. I think Liverpool need to get the balance right with that sort of thing, because Liverpool, unlike the likes of Benfica and potentially Southampton and, Roma and teams like that, Liverpool in a luxurious position whereby they're at the top of the football and food chain. So when you're in that position, you can basically let the likes of Benfica do the developing for you. And as soon as the player reaches prime level, right, we'll have him. He can come to Liverpool now. Yeah. And over the past couple of years, when Liverpool struggled, the problem was Liverpool was a feeder club at the time. Liverpool were preparing these players once they got good enough to the elite level. Barcelona would just come and post them, or Real Madrid would just come and post them. And as a result of that, you have a bit of a glass ceiling. So I think Liverpool should pick up on the odd prospect, and we have done with the likes of Fabio Carvalho and Harvey Elliott and things like that, Calvin Ramsey and players. But for the most part, for Liverpool to remain on the elite table, you basically need proven talent a lot of the time. Mm-hmm. Ideally, you want proven talent that is under the age of 24, 25. You get that with Canate, get that with Núñez, although he's still a very rough diamond. Gakpo, I think, is 24, 23. 23.
Diogo Jota as well.
Yeah, Diogo Jota as well. So, although I understand the concerns that Liverpool should be buying direct from River Plate or whatever in that sense, I have no issues with Liverpool paying a bit more for when the player's a bit ready-made. And in terms of Gakpo, he looks like that. He looks like that kind of player. We obviously just touched on his goals and assists there. I think it's an important element of his game to highlight a little bit more, actually, because he seems to be that kind of player who is very much two-way in terms of creating and scoring to a roughly equal level, unlike someone like maybe Jota, who's very much a goal scorer, doesn't tend to register very many assists. Gakpo seems to have that two-way element about his game, which is good for us.
He does, and a lot of his assists have come from corners, which obviously from a Liverpool perspective at the moment, he might not necessarily be taking every single one, but his open play assists do show the profile of a player who can do it a lot more often. He has a beautiful way of cutting aside and whipping the ball into the penalty area that's been devastating. And when you consider that we now have a guy who's very good in the air in those situations, in and around the penalty area, you can definitely see a connection between them two developing. And I just think he's at the stage of his career now where, like you say, he's got the ability, he's got the confidence, he's got the maturity to be able to handle things. And I think we will see how versatile he ends up being. I do think that most of his initial time is going to come from that left side, but there is lots of talk of his versatility, the ability to play centrally. We'll see how that develops, but I do think that he could be just what we need at this time in terms of a creative spark, particularly when we're also concerned about how many chances we're missing at the moment.
Yeah, well, you touched on his crossing there. I think if we're kind of painting a picture of what his game looks like, crossing is very much in there. So far this season in the Dutch Eredivisie, he ranks third in Holland for crosses. He's hit 134 behind two players. Dusan Tadic is one of them, and the other lad is a fullback by the looks of it for Vitesse. And those three are kind of out on their own. The next best has got like 95. So Gakpo's a keen crosser, but it's not like a cross as in Trent Alexander-Arnold or David Beckham or someone like that. It seems to be a cross as in he runs at a back line from a wide area on the left, and rather than cutting inside and kind of manipulating the situation to get a shot away like Salah does on the opposite side, for example, Gakpo tends to cut inside to the edge of the box. And he's got this way about him where he's really capable of putting in these like almost pitching wedge crosses towards the back post. Really delicate, cute crosses, but lots of technique on it. And they usually get converted with a head, which, as you say, really valuable considering we've got Darwin Núñez in the box now. And even Jota, if Jota was playing in there, Jota we know was very good in the air.
Yes.
So it's a nice little weapon, I think, to add to your attacking armory, if you like, because I can't really, off the top of my head, I'm not sure other Liverpool players offer that kind of dynamic. So it's just another way, I suppose, of creating chances that we don't already have.
Yeah, and we need as many of them as possible. I think the other thing, he does like to cut inside a lot, and he will probably do it more often than not. But he does have the ability to go on the outside as well. And he can cross with his left foot and be effective. So I don't think it's one where teams are going to just build a wall and try to send him down the outside and then they shut him off. They are going to have a lot of trouble to deal with him. And I just think he's another guy who's going to occupy defense's mind, time, and space. And when you have that, it's going to help the other two guys. And if you can get a scenario where you have him, Núñez, Salah, all on the pitch at the same time, all causing those problems and able to link up with each other, then that is a very tasty proposition for Liverpool going forward, I think.
Yeah, some other elements of his game, he is inclined to receive the ball to feet rather than threatening behind. Although he can do that, I think he's got enough pace about him to do that. But I think predominantly he is a ball to feet player. And on top of that, he is, in terms of his technique, obviously I've just touched on that with his crossing. His shooting technique seems to be really good as well. He seems to connect with the ball really well, like a solid ball striker. Scores a fair few goals from outside the box by the looks of it as a result of that. And if we look at his expected goals in the Eredivisie and in Europe, going back to 2018, which is when, for example, Alisson's young Liverpool. Since then, he's overperformed expected goals by 11.2 goals, which suggests that he's a decent finisher. And if you look at him when he strikes a ball, you can tell that really. You can tell that he can put his foot through it.
He spent a lot of time looking at and modelling himself after his hero, which is Thierry Henry. And when you look at, if you look at a compilation of his finishing, then Thierry Henry screams back at you. And let's face it, he's not the worst person to be copying, really, is he?
No, he's not. And I think another element in which he's similar to Henry is he's quite tall. Gakpo, he is about 6'2", I think it is.
I think 6'4". I think he's bigger than that. I think he's taller than Núñez.
Oh, okay. Well, it says 6'2" on FBref, but maybe, you know, those numbers tend to be a little bit unreliable when it comes to height and stuff. Everyone's got a different take on that, so maybe he is. Yeah, I mean, I've seen him with Klopp. He's definitely taller than Klopp.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, really interesting. But I think in comparison to Henry was also tall, right? But neither of them scored that many headers despite the height. And I think that, you know, they're similar in that sense. So Gakpo, you could argue, okay, he's a threat from set pieces now because we've got a 6'3" lad in or whatever he is. But he doesn't score many with his head. So that's just something to throw in there. It's a nice thing to have a physical player like that who's quick, but like Núñez in a way. But Núñez is good with his head. Gakpo wins aerial duels. His aerial duel numbers are better than many of his peers in terms of forwards, but doesn't seem to score very many, which is curious.
No, I think what that is nature of is he's winning aerial duels against fullbacks when he's being drawn out wide and they're playing the ball up to him. What he's not doing is fighting with the centre halves in the centre of the pitch. He's not kind of back to goal bruiser if he plays as a number 9. In fact, if you have one of those, play him just behind him and he'll thrive. If someone else is doing all of the bruising work and he's able to nip in. But he can use his height to his advantage, as I say, when he pulls out wide, because more often than not, unless you play Newcastle, of course, they are going to have very tall fullbacks.
Yeah. I think another element to his game as well is he's a really keen ball carrier as well. Not specifically a dribbling, although he is a keen dribbler as well, but just his tendency to carry the ball over large distances. A bit like Jota when Jota was at Wolves. A bit like Jared Bowen when Liverpool were linked with Jared Bowen at West Ham. Liverpool tend to like these wide players who, if needed, can act as like outlets basically and carry it up the field. And Gakpo seems to be one of those players. Scored a lot of goals and registered a fair few assists and chances created and stuff like that last season on the back of carries, which is a nice quality to have. But if we touch on downsides, which is a thing that we do, you know, we can't avoid that. And it's not really a downside, but one of the interesting things I thought when I was looking at his profile was just his general pass completion is really, really low, like extremely low. He completes so far, well, not so far this season, over the past year, he's averaged just under 66% pass completion, which is really, really low and puts him in the bottom 7% of forwards across Europe. So he's obviously a player who loses the ball pretty often. You know, a way of looking at that really is when he's on the ball and he makes a pass, he's essentially like 34% likely to find an opponent with that pass, which is interesting.
It is. One thing I would say though as well is I think his volume of passing is down low, which again may suggest how he's being used, as in he's not the one doing the passing, he's the one they're passing to. So when he's leaving the ball, it's either a cross, as we mentioned, or a shot. So from that perspective, yes, I think it is something that has been mentioned against him in terms of his losing possession. That's definitely one thing that did against him in Holland. Something he'll definitely have to improve on in a Liverpool team. But I think the best way to kind of counteract that, particularly in the early days, is to get other players in and around him. I think I'd like to think that Andy Robertson will be playing in his first few appearances behind him, because he's got experience of having basically bringing someone into the system in a very similar way to how he did with Luis Diaz a year ago. He's almost like the left-sided babysitter, and he's really good at it as well. So Robertson will be able to kind of pick up on what Gakpo wants to do, where he wants to do, and get in and around him. So there's always a red shirt within 5 or 10 yards of him. So he's not being expected to always try to play difficult balls. He has an outlet. But I wouldn't be surprised to see Liverpool use him in a similar way. I think we go back to Diaz in terms of him being an outlet ball. That was something that happened quite a lot. And when you consider the way Liverpool playing in the present main and the fact that teams against us are looking to pack the center, there's a lot of space out wide. So in that instance, if we have a pacey guy out wide who's good at running with the ball and good at producing output of crosses and shots at the end of it, feels like a kind of a perfect fit.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the tendencies to lose the ball could just stem from the fact he has been the talisman really for PSV, so he's inclined to try things, inclined to take risks on the ball, and obviously his assist numbers are decent, so it could just stem from that really. But it is curious considering, say for example, Diaz, the year that Liverpool signed Diaz from Porto, Diaz was Porto's talisman, and he played on the same side. Mm-hmm. And Diaz posted a passing accuracy of just under 80% that season. As I said, Gakpo down towards 65%.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons I think it's interesting as well is Liverpool already have a few of these players in the team and in the attack. Jota gives the ball away a lot. Salah gives the ball away a lot. Núñez gives the ball away a lot. And Trent gives the ball away a lot. And I think one of the players who is maybe a bit more inclined to make the ball stick is Roberto Firmino.
Yes.
Who has a contract which is due to expire at the end of the season. So it's just a curious dynamic to keep an eye on, maybe, that Liverpool are signing these players who are extremely creative but are maybe a bit almost too inclined to embrace risk to the extent that you can maybe be a little bit open. But we'll see on that. Maybe his numbers will take a massive boost in that sense because he's playing for a more dominant team like Liverpool. But it's definitely a curious element worth touching on and worth monitoring as well.
I agree. I think when you look at the profile of our forwards, Firmino still does a lot of things that no one else does. Yeah. And for that reason, I'd still be inclined to keep him around. I do think Jota is improving in that element in terms of keeping the ball, particularly when he plays in that kind of withdrawn central position. But yeah, at the moment, it does look like we've got, in terms of the complementary players, we're going to need someone behind them who's very good at keeping the ball and very good at winning it back if any of those other guys lose it.
Yeah, I'm thinking someone like a Firmino or even like a Griezmann in the World Cup, just like someone to provide a bit of glue. I'm thinking just because if we're playing with a front line of Gakpo, Salah, and Núñez, I mean the ball's not going to stick, is it? The ball's it's chaos. It's also chaos. And if you could just put a number 10 in there, maybe in a 4-2-3-1, or maybe even two really consoling number 8s could do it or something. But I'm just thinking you might need a player in there who just kind of helps things tick over, like Firmino has done over the past few years, and like Griezmann did at the World Cup to a really high level.
Agreed. It'll be interesting to see who we try to target for that role, because I do believe that whoever comes in midfield, one of them is going to have that job.
Yeah. And I think one further, I'm not sure if it's a downside, it's more of a concern, is obviously Liverpool have bought this player who favours the left of the pitch. And if you look at the squad, injury-free at least, we're quite well stacked over there. So, I mean, that's Diaz's position. Diaz doesn't really play anywhere else either.
No.
And Jota, if Jota's going to play on a flank, he would favour that side. And if you think of Núñez is a striker for me, central. But if he's going to drift towards anywhere, it's going to be the left.
Yes.
So to get Gakpo in as well, have you got any concern there about, like, did we need a left-sided forward, another left-sided forward? You know what I mean?
Potentially, but again, this does depend upon how much development and how much of his versatility we can use. Because obviously, in the World Cup for the Netherlands, he was played centrally, more as kind of almost as a 10 than a proper 9, because they had Bergwijn and Memphis Depay ahead of him, but they also had 3 centre halves behind him, and that's not something that Liverpool ever do. And I do think tactically there is a large gap between what Louis van Gaal wants to do and what Jurgen Klopp wants to do, which might make his suitability for the centre something that's a little bit further along. But I do think it is in his future. I do think he can do it. I think he's going to have to get a little bit stronger, particularly to be able to take the battering from centre halves in behind him. He's probably going to have to improve on his actual play with the back to goal as well. But he does have it in his locker. Like, I've kind of did a little bit of a potential depth chart based on what we have. And to be honest, based on having no Firmino. And I did have Diaz, Jota, Gakpo, and Nunez all potentially out on the left side. But then I do think that you've got, for the central role, Nunez, Jota, Salah, and then maybe eventually Gakpo as well. So I think that maybe right side, you're looking at Salah and potentially Ben Doak. That's probably the one that's looking a little thin. But I do think that options-wise, it's not going to be a case of everyone only wants to play there. I do think we are going to get to see some of them, Jota in particular, move around.
Yeah, I mean, I think I read something that it's not actually dependent on Diaz and Jota being injured, and this was a long-term sign that Liverpool were always interested in anyway. But whether I totally believe that, I don't know. I do think this has been kind of enforced a little bit by the serious long-term knocks to our 2 left-sided options, and in that sense, I don't overly mind it, because I do think you need a threat on both flanks, and we haven't really had that since the return. I mean, I am curious to see kind of what happens when everybody's fit. But then, A, that really happens, and B, you have nice substitutes and you have a lot of competitions to play. So it's going to be interesting to see how Klopp uses them, and whether he does feel them as a number 10 every now and then, whether he feels them through the middle. Maybe given his height and given the fact he can probably bulk up a bit, and given the fact that he is a bit of an output merchant in terms of goals and assists, maybe he can follow a similar path to Cristiano Ronaldo potentially, where he scores goals a lot from the flanks and eventually becomes a man for the middle. But it's going to be interesting to see how he develops. But right now, Liverpool have a bit of a weird, uneven forward line, and a lot of it stems from several injuries on the left and the fact that Mohamed Salah is just indestructible on the right. You know, it's funny.
I always make the joke that Mo Salah is basically Bruce Willis in Unbreakable, and everybody else is Samuel L. Jackson. Like literally everybody else.
Yeah, everyone else is Mr. Glass.
But I think you're right. Not only the fact that it's so rare that we have all of our forwards available, but when they are all available, we will need to change the game from the bench. That is something that all top teams need to have. Last year, it was massive for us. And we've already said the idea of tied defenses, having someone like Gakpo to come on, or having someone like Nunez to come on, or having someone like Diego Jota to come on, or Luis Diaz to come on. When you think about a game that's been tight and tough, and the opponents have been tired out, and then you put those guys on, like that is going to be the difference between drawing and winning and losing and drawing on more than one occasion if we get it right.
Yeah, I mean, overall, I have no major issues with the sign. I think it's a good price. He's a good age. He's making the leap. Does seem to be a bit of an output merchant. Versatile, speaks the language very well. Tall, so there's lots of positives in there. I know there's been a bit of controversy around Lijnders and all this stuff, but I don't think this is a bad signing by any means. I think this is a good player, and it's going to be interesting to see how he fits in. But we'll call it a day there on Gakpo, because we've got other talking points to address. Next up, we'll just touch on Liverpool's form. I think we'll just look at all 3 games as a whole, and I mean, what are your overriding feelings now, Mo, after seeing Liverpool back for a week or two? You know, is there any change in your opinion? Anything like that?
No. It's a little bit more worried, to be honest with you, because I was thinking that the form that we showed towards the end of the break was something that we could potentially build on. I've heard all of the right noises, what they were talking about in the second preseason, about how they were working specifically on the pressing and the counter pressing, and how it was something that was a real focus for the team and becoming less open. And it's not worked because we are still wide open. Now, we talked before about Firmino and his ability to be the glue. I think what we saw in those 3 games before the break was him at the tip of a midfield diamond, being the first line of defense, if you will, that allows the other 3 in midfield to be just that little bit deeper. And it wasn't very noticeable in terms of the distances, the average positions, but it seemed to really work. Now, Firmino's not been out. I mean, Firmino's not been available in these first 3 games. And again, we've been wide open. And as we mentioned before, there's not very many other people at the moment who can do the Firmino role the way he does it. So that does kind of make me worried. Potentially when he comes back, it might solve some of the problems short term. But again, we've mentioned he can't be playing every week.
Yeah, I think I said a while back, I can't remember what it was on the back of. Liverpool picked up a result that way it wasn't particularly good. And my take from it on this show, I think, was I don't think anything is going to change until this is addressed in the transfer market. I think this is Liverpool now. What we've seen the past 3 weeks or whatever you want to call it, 3 games, sorry. This is Liverpool now. We can pose a threat in attack. We can dominate the ball sometimes when we're not attacked. But when we are attacked, we're so easy to cut open. And we have no presence in the middle of the field, no legs at all. The engine room's completely out of steam. And you've got players who have either been there too long or unsuitable to the roles. And as I said, I don't think the only thing is it doesn't look like we're going to address it this window. So we're going to have to put up with this for another 6 months. This is Liverpool for 6 months now, sadly.
I hope not. I hope we do still address it in the window, and I'm not giving up hope. I'm just checking on my calendar. It's only the 5th of January, Josh. Come on, man. We got time. a few more bad defeats, and I'm sure someone will be kind of press gang this way. No, I'm only half joking. I do think some of the noises around we're not doing anything are just those noises, because in this current market, particularly in the January market, which is so sensitive, I think it's fair to say, in terms of fluctuations and deals coming close and then crashing around you, you don't want to say I'm desperate. And watching Liverpool at the moment makes us look desperate. So everything we say needs to kind of try and drag that back. So I'm not too concerned about that. We might get here on February 1st and we haven't solved it, and then we got a problem. But yeah, I do, because of the nature of the problem in terms of it's the lack of the intensity available, there's only so much you can do. I think that was my point when I was talking to Jamie Carragher, because he mentioned about everybody just dropping deeper, although he only mentioned defense. He later added everybody. But even if we are closer to each other and come more compact, at the moment, I still don't trust us to be able to close the spaces. So then we've just got the same problem, just closer to the goal. You look at Milner, you look at Henderson, you look at Fabinho, you look at Thiago. Those 4 guys have got an average age of 32 years old. They've played 67% of the midfield minutes. Like, that is a recipe for disaster. Now, you can say the reasons behind why Curtis Jones hasn't played more, why Naby Keita hasn't played more, but those are the only 2, really, who you can say within the squad would be able and should be able to do the job to give them rest and time. They haven't been there, and so we've got nobody. And getting someone in there. I mean, there is still Arthur, of course. We'll have to wait and see what happens with him. He's still there. Like, he's still wearing them training bibs. I don't know how much training but I mean, yeah, I think in terms of in the way that in previous injury crises, Klopp has adapted formations and game plans. I think of obviously earlier in the season when we were going with the 4-4-2 kind of flat thing, and even previous times when we had Ozan Kabak and Nat Phillips in centre halves, and everybody just had to come back a bit. So it has happened, but I feel Klopp is still really reluctant to do it. So we might still see more of what we saw over the last couple of games, where we're trying to get people to do something that they just can't do anymore.
Yeah, well, the thing is, I can sort of understand why he's reluctant to do it. And the reason I can understand that is because I think Liverpool's system, for the most part, is fine. But what I think the problem is the players. you fielding players who can't do it anymore. And I think if you was to take out, I don't know who played as the number 8 against Brentford. If you take out Thiago and Harvey Elliott, and you put in Jude Bellingham and Enzo Fernandez, let's say, it's probably not when Liverpool aren't going to get those two players. But let's say you just put them in. Liverpool, it's an entirely different game, completely different game, and this is why I feel like long term I'm not that worried about Liverpool. I think we'll be fine because I think if you fix the midfield, everything else kind of fixes. Like, you'll be amazed at the difference it makes.
Yes.
But short term, I do think for the next 6 months it's going to be awful. And I don't think we're going to qualify for the Champions League. I really don't.
Well, I mean, I'm not 100% sure that I still think we've got a fighting chance. I still think we've got a better chance.
Yeah, we've got a fighting chance, yeah. And but I think it's more hope than anything else.
We've got a better chance. We've got a better chance than at least 2 of the teams currently above us, if you ask me, personally. I do think that.
Okay, let's have a
look. So I think we got a better chance than Spurs, and I do think we got a better chance than Man United, personally. I know the Man United are looking good at the moment, but I don't believe that they're going to be this good from now to the end of the season. And the other thing you got to think about with top 4, with as more teams that are in the fight, more good teams there are, the higher the chance of other teams dropping points. And as we've seen so far this season, there's only been 3 teams available to put 4 wins plus together in a row in the league. That's Arsenal, Newcastle, and Liverpool. So when we get it right, we can do it in a way that so far no one else has been able to prove that they can. So that's why I'm still not junking that. But you're right, it could be messy. And the other reason why it could be messy and it could be a longer term problem is that, yes, bringing in new players does solve the problem, but we might have to widen the pool of players who we think can solve that problem. Because if it's just this guy or no one, as it has been previously, and then we're left with no one, we've seen what that looks like. we can't afford to do that many times because we are just going to be left with no one forever. We can't do that anymore. So I don't know whether or not that means that there's going to be compromises made or whether we're just going to have to, I don't know, cast our net wider. But we need to be decisive. Whatever happens in the next 2 windows in the midfield department, we need to be decisive.
Yeah, I think my issue is just, as I said earlier, the past 3 games for me since Christmas, that is Liverpool now for me. That's Liverpool now. Exactly what we've seen. We have goals, we have attacking threats. Obviously, I have some sympathy there with the attacking injuries. You know, that's a little bit different, and maybe Gakpo will give us a boost in that sense. But particularly the way we are without the ball, that's Liverpool, and that's going to remain, I think, until the end of the season. So far, Liverpool have given away 51 big chances this season.
It's a lot.
Arsenal. And I think there's only Leeds and Fulham who are worse than that. And if you look at the teams above Liverpool in terms of the Champions League, Manchester United and Spurs, I'm not convinced by either of them. No. I don't think either of them are consistent enough to be reliable and things like that. But my problem is, unlike previous years, neither Liverpool. Right. That's my thing at the minute. Previous years, I've had confidence that Liverpool have either been unlucky or whatever it's been, or things like that. But right now, I just don't know if the gap between Liverpool and Man United at the minute is 7 points. Same amount of games played. I don't know if Liverpool are going to be 7 points better than Man United in the second half of the season. It's possible, but it's more. It feels like it's more hope than logic when I look at it.
Well, I mean, Man United have got to play Man City and Arsenal back to back very soon. And they've got a midweek game as well because they're in the quarterfinal of the EFL Cup. They might rotate, but they can't rotate a lot. So again, it could look very different very soon. This is the thing about this season, is that unpredictability kind of hangs over everything. And so it allows you to think, well, that doesn't look good, but we don't really know anything this year, to be honest.
I think one of the problems I have, though, is if you look at Liverpool's previous 2 games, even before Brentford, we shouldn't have won against Leicester.
No, but
Villa was fine. Villa was fine for a half at least. Villa was fine. I think we deserved to win that game overall. But Leicester and Brentford would have easily been 2 losses.
Leicester was wild. There's no getting around it. I think we don't have the security, we don't have the surety of being good in the way that we used to. But there are still enough indicators, I think, that can get us through. And it doesn't help when you're having to rely on these things because they can go wrong. But I remember not too long ago, a Manchester United side that were terribly open defensively, had horrific centre halves, but what they did have was a very good goalkeeper and forwards who scored goals. We have a very good goalkeeper. Yeah. And you mentioned we're the top of the big chances league in terms of giving them up. We're top of the big chances league in terms of creating them as well.
Yeah, now, and top for missing them as well.
As top for missing them, yes, obviously. But the thing with that is, I think, and this feels like it could be a whole show on its own, finishing and the ability to finish those chances, a lot of it is mental. So it's, in that respect, can potentially be solvable. But a lot of it is average, a lot of averages. And I think that the volume of chances that we're creating is so high that we are going to start scoring them. And those are going to go down. Because a lot of focus has been on Darwin Núñez missing chances. And yes, there are a reason for those. I mean, Salah's been doing it as well. And I really do not expect Salah to keep missing big chances. And that's the difference, really, isn't it? If you've got 3 quality players, when we add Cody Gakpo in, all 3 of them aren't going to be having off days every week. And if we're creating that volume of chances and one of them's not having an off day, we will score goals. Again, this is not the kind of strength of play that we're used to. You're right. We are going to look shonky for quite some time, I think, this season. But these are the things that can bail us out.
Yeah,
they might not necessarily, but they can bail us out.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I think overall, Liverpool are kind of in a position now where they just need to keep grinding results out. Basically, I've had a few questions sent to me regarding like Klopp's time at Dortmund and whether this is, history repeating itself. Basically, I would argue no. I don't think it's the same. I almost think the BVB side was better, but the issue was at the time Dortmund were just really, really unlucky. That was the difference then. They were creating a fair bit. The goalkeeper was massively underperforming. I think the finishing was underperforming as well. Mm-hmm. And I think in reality, if everything had been normal, I think Dortmund would have been Champions League spots, but obviously they weren't. And on the back of that, people judged it as like, it's time out. Klopp's kind of finished in the role and things like that. When in reality, he was never the issue.
No, and the other thing about the Klopp Dortmund thing, the reason why he announced it when he did and left when he did was because they already know who was replacing him. Thomas Tuchel, who was already there. Like that transition was a done deal at some point, because at that stage in his career, Klopp wasn't thinking about staying at any club forever and ever. He was already thinking about that transition. So I think it's kind of overplayed, that whole crumble thing. I do think if he'd have stayed there to the end of the season, the upturn that they had second half probably still would have happened. So I'm not as fearful of that as a lot of people are anyway. And yeah, I agree with you. I don't think that's what we're seeing now. I think what we are seeing now is a perfect storm of a very particular set of circumstances based on the achievements and the disappointments and exactly how we've got there, whether it's through the recruitment system, whether that's through the intensity of our play. All of those things factor in. There is no one golden solution or golden symptom that's causing all of it. I know it'd be so much easier if there was, but there isn't.
At the same time, I do think there's one primary headline issue, and it is the midfield for me. I think if you look at the team, the goalkeeper's fine, the left back, the right back, and the centre halves are fine. The front line is fine, especially with Gakpo's addition now. You've brought down the average age, you've got in the new generation. That's fine. It's the midfield, and I think with us doing a weekly podcast, it's easy to kind of start going galaxy brain and start going really deep into like, is it this? Is it the kit man? And all this stuff. in reality, it's the same issue we identified 3 months ago. It's the midfield. Fix the midfield, and the transformation will be dramatic. It'll be overnight. Just like in 2018, Liverpool finished 4th. Brought in Van Dijk, Fabinho, and Alisson Becker, and then accumulated 90. How many points? 90.
It's 97 that first year.
97, oh no, wait. Yeah, 97 it was. Yeah. That's the transition that you make overnight if you fully throw everything you've got at your overwhelming problem. And Liverpool's overwhelming problem for me is the engine room, because there's no steam left. There's nothing left in there.
No, but it's noticeable that problem changed overnight with 3 players, because there was a little bit of a narrative that Van Dijk came in and suddenly night was day, but it wasn't quite like that. And you can't hang everything on one guy. It needs to be more than that. And in the situation we're in, I think when you're kind of trying to hedge your bets on 2 or 3 different options, but also save enough money for the one that you really want, it's a very, very difficult problem to get around. But as much as I do think Jude Bellingham would be a fantastic footballer for Liverpool, I think if it comes down to we can guarantee we get him, but we might not get anyone else, or getting 2 or 3 good options, I'm definitely going with option B.
Yeah, I'm not sure where I stand on that one, to be honest. I do think Liverpool need multiple additions, though, without question. There's no way we need one. Definitely need a bare minimum 2 in centre midfield, honestly, without question. But it's just going to be interesting to see how we cope now. If we don't address it this window, it's going to be interesting to see what the rest of the season looks like, because it's difficult to play without a midfield, really is. But for the last 10 minutes anyway, we will talk about the whole Pep Lijnders narrative. I think some news came out about his power growing at Anfield. It's something that has been, I think we mentioned it on this podcast, and it's been speculated by a few people and things like that. What do you think?
Well, first of all, when I first saw it, I thought, well, this is interesting, literally, because it's things.
In fact, you sent me it, didn't you, actually?
Yeah, because it was like, this is some of the stuff that we've discussed kind of like in the abstract, but again, from a base of zero knowledge. And someone's kind of put all of those well, I want to call them maybe circumstantial pieces of evidence together, strung them together, and made an article out of it. We have to be careful with this because obviously we don't know who does what, and we're not there. So you can be made to look stupid in the future when someone releases an autobiography and tells everybody what's going on. But whenever the stories like this come out, I think it's important to kind of take a step back and just look at the whole picture. For starters, the story was broken by Sam Wallace of The Telegraph, who is a very reputable writer. He's the chief writer of The Telegraph, football writer. But he's not the guy who does the Liverpool beat. That's Chris Bascombe. And as yet, Chris Bascombe has said nothing on the matter of Pep Lijnders and his influence, which either tells me that Liverpool have decided to bypass Bascombe for some unknown reason, or Wallace's connection is maybe not as strong as we're led to believe. And so there's that. That source point is always really important in stories like this. But when you think about the actual bones of what is being said in terms of the fact that because we're buying players from the Dutch league and the Portuguese league, these are places that Pep Lijnders has influence in, knowledge and scouting of. And so we are turning the keys over to him. Well, that's the kind of knowledge and extra kind of scouting now that all clubs use and all clubs want. So the fact that that's been painted as a bad thing now is interesting to me. The second part that's interesting to me is the idea that Jurgen Norbert Klopp, who we've all known and seen for the last 7 years, is just going to like kick back, you know, give Pep the keys and be like, oh yeah, you crack on, lad. I'm not worried. and the evidence of this is that he's taking training sessions. Like, guys, assistant managers take training sessions. Kind of the way it always goes. So yeah, I'm putting a Scarface-sized mound of salt on the table when reading it, but it is interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. I think the training thing is absolute nonsense. That just doesn't matter in the slightest, and that's been the case for years. By the way, Lijnders has been taking training sessions for years. That is not a problem, and he's part of the reason why Liverpool got so good at building from the back suddenly and possession-based football suddenly and breaking down a block and all that stuff. That stems from Lijnders because there was a point where he kind of took over from Buvac basically when Buvac left. So I've got no issues with him taking training sessions. And I will say as well that a similar dynamic happened at Old Trafford with Ferguson. Ferguson was there for so long. He got to a point eventually where he was kind of just overseeing everything as more of a delegator, really, and just kind of that leader, authoritative figure who kind of led. Because Klopp said, like, one thing with Lijnders is Klopp did his coaching badges like 20 years ago, you know, and football's such a modern game that, like, after stuff Klopp learned, probably well out of date by now. Lijnders is much more of a modern coach in that sense. And then you got Vita Massos from Porto, who's potentially going to be the next guy in line. You know, you're always trying to get new ideas in. So there's no issues with that. In terms of the transfers, if he's getting blamed, or not blamed, if he's getting the credit or whatever for Gakpo, Diaz, and Nunes, I have no major problems with that because those three, in my opinion, are good signings. And if we didn't know about the Lijnders news, I would put them all down to data-driven signings as well. I don't think there's any major issues with any of them. They're all good players, and they're all output merchants, really, in the numbers. One of the issues I do have is Liverpool's midfield oversight in the summer is a massive oversight, and it's hugely cost us. And I would like to know where that stemmed from and how that happened. And I think if you're kind of doing all your business through Klopp and Lijnders rather than the sporting director and a gang of nerds, essentially, in the nicest possible way, by the way. I'm a huge fan of these nerds. I do think it kind of impacts three areas if you kind of do it all yourself almost. I think, first of all, it will make the eventual loss of Klopp harder to manage, which I have touched on. But I think if you're doing it all, if the guy at the top's doing it all like Wenger and Ferguson did, everything collapses when he leaves, which we've touched on. Second, there's more loyalty to favourites, such as Henderson and Milner, for example. So there's a bit of evidence with that. And on top of that, as you say, Mo, there's a tendency to favour certain markets. Gakpo from Holland, which is where Lijnders is from, and Nunes and Diaz, both from Portugal, which is where Lijnders previously coached and where Julian Ward has a lot of connections and things like that. So I think that much of a problem, because I think Michael Edwards did it to an extent with Red Bull clubs, for example. But I suppose it is when it comes to like, there's a better alternative somewhere, like say for example in France, but you're just not going there because you don't know France that well. That's an issue.
Yeah, I think when it becomes to the detriment of everything else. But again, without being in the room, we don't know what discussions were. We don't know who else was under consideration and all of those things. But like you say, in terms of what we were saying before, in terms of whose voices are being valued in the room and those kind of things, you can see how it can cause tension. I mean, it was only a couple of weeks ago we were told that Julian Ward gave up his Christmas dinner to get Cody Gakpo over the line, and now someone else is being given the credit. I mean, I'd be pissed off. But I mean, in all seriousness, though, until we get to the end of this transfer window, really, or maybe even the summer, and we see what our real strategy is, it's hard to really kind of make these kind of, oh, well, this is definitely the situation kind of statements. But it can lead to issues. Another issue that you mentioned before, you were listing all the things about Klopp having too much autonomy. One of the things I've seen from a lot of different sports is that the manager of the team should not have any influence whatsoever on the money of the players. So salaries, so contract renewals, all of that stuff should be someone else's problem. Because when a player and a club are in disagreement over those things, you don't want that to spill over into the dressing room. You want that to be all the way over there. And you've seen it so many times in American sports where you've got a guy who's a coach and the general manager being the downfall, and you don't see it coming. And we've already had a little bit of a flavor of that with apparently Klopp stepping in to secure Henderson's new contract. Now, he's the captain, and that can be seen as a kind of a special case. So that might not necessarily cause any eruptions within the dressing room. But I do think it's a dangerous road to go down.
It is. And I think on top of that, I think one of the reasons why Liverpool didn't go for an alternative for Tchouaméni is because Klopp was really keen to keep Milner in the building. And I think if we'd have got an alternative to Tchouaméni, maybe Milner leaves. And I think Klopp's really loyal to Milner. I think he loves the fact that he manages the dressing room for him almost. So you could argue Milner's still here largely because of Klopp. And I think it's also worth noting that this week I've read that Klopp has said that he wants Firmino to stay. Klopp also wants Gini Wijnaldum to stay. And at the end of the day, you can't keep everyone. You know, these players have to leave. I would have been interested to see his opinion on Lallana, to be honest. Because he doesn't seem to want to part with these players who served him well. And I understand that, but you need to be a bit more Ferguson in that sense and kind of cut the ties when they're finished for you.
Definitely. And again, the human side of him, which is such a big draw and such a big plus in the down times, there are downsides to it, and this is potentially one of them, that kind of ruthlessness. But by the same token, I don't think I would expect to really hear a manager say that he wants to get rid of him, particularly
true, yeah, that's true.
Like with the guys who he's wanting to get rid of, we've known. Basically everyone who's left except Gini.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what happens with Firmino anyway. I mean, there's some report that he's got an offer from Saudi Arabia and things like that. But if I'm totally honest, looking at Firmino, he does look aging. He does look past it, a little bit worn, a little bit tired. Still obvious quality when he's on the ball and things like that, and he'll still run himself into the ground for you. But it's sometimes you need to just kind of cut ties a little bit, and it's a bit of a problem when you run on a recruitment yourself. And Liverpool seem to have encountered issues this season, and it's coincided with Lijnders doing more and sporting director resigning and the data guy getting off in Ian Graham. So there's something going on behind the scenes. I don't know what it is, but if Lijnders is getting, I don't think he should be scapegoated or anything like that. I don't think he's suddenly like, picked up the crown while Klopp's asleep and he's took charge of the building or something like that, like Die Hard style or something. I don't think it's anything like that, but I do think the gradual change that seems to be happening. We touched on this a few weeks ago. I think it's almost a natural change that does happen because Klopp's been at the club longer than the typical sporting director, which is unusual. But you just have to be careful that the typical negatives or cons or whatever you want to call it that attach to that kind of old school British structure don't start biting you, and they've already started biting Liverpool by the looks of it.
And I mean, without wanting to sound a bit trite, for the last 5 years, every club apart from Man City have been talking about they want to copy Liverpool. They want to do what we done. They want our method for success. So it's not the time for us to start going back to what everyone else was doing before when they weren't successful. You see what I mean? That might not necessarily be a good idea. But again, we don't know how much is in all of this, and we won't until in the future. But there's a point where you need to try to move and evolve as a team, and you might not necessarily be able to do things the same way over and over again. But by the same token, it has to be gradual. It has to be an evolution. You can't suddenly junk one manual and open another one and everyone expects to be on the same page straight away. It needs to be some kind of, if you are thinking about those things, you need to do it gradually. And again, we need to have as many of the wise heads who've been involved up to this point still involved.
Yeah. Well, listen, we've done as best as we can to cover all of the stuff that we've missed. It's a long episode. We've covered an hour. And we've got more to cover next week. Obviously, we haven't even touched on the likes of Matthias Nunes and Harvey Elliott and things like that. So
we'll have another new signing. We'll have a brand new midfielder to discuss next week. You watch.
Yeah, well, hopefully I'll take it. But Mo, thanks for joining us, mate. And looking forward to the rest of 2023, I suppose.
Definitely. Hopefully Liverpool will start winning a few football matches as well.
Yeah, that'd be nice. That'd make it a lot easier for us. But yeah, thanks for tuning in. Sorry for being away for so long, and we'll see you next week.